Welcome to The Wedding Edit, a wedding planning podcast for the modern couple. We are your hosts, Dana and Kelly. Today we have the lovely, vibrant, talented Hannah from Blossie. So welcome, Hannah. So great to have you.
Thank you so much. It's so cool to be here.
Yeah, I can't wait to chat all things invitations and stationery for weddings. It's going to be really good. So if you're wanting to know all about wedding stationery, invitations, save the dates, all of that, you're in for a treat today. So Hannah, I'd love to get started with what inspired you to get into stationery?
Well, it actually just sort of fell on my lap. Essentially, I was engaged myself. I was in New Zealand at the time and I was looking for wedding vendors here in Australia. I got married in Tasmania and I couldn't really find anyone that I loved the style of for wedding stationery. So, yeah, I just started an Instagram account essentially, and with my bit of my graphic knowledge, I started designing some mock-ups and playing around, and from that I actually got a few stylists interested in working with me.
So Hannah, tell me a little bit about your stationery for your wedding then. I'd love to hear like what colours you did, what kind of style.
Yeah, so my wedding was in early 2020, so a couple of years ago now. So, you know, trends are always changing. But we actually had most of our guests come from New Zealand. So in terms of an invitation, we actually went fully online. So I didn't actually have any paper invitations, but we just did something really fun with our engagement shoot, and I just sort of chose fonts and colours that went with the wedding aesthetic, I guess you could say. And then for the day of wedding stationery and signage, I wanted something that felt quite classic and timeless, but still had a little bit of, I guess you could say, like, had a little bit of funk, a little bit of difference to it. So for our menus, I actually did personalised messages on the back of them for all of the guests.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so just to make it a bit more of a keepsake item as well, opposed to, you know, going in the trash potentially.
Yeah.
And so I stick with the arch shape, I sticked with the arch shape because it was really trendy back then. It still is now, but I've noticed the wave is making the waves for the shape of the moment. But yeah, so I went for arch for basically everything. And just had really minimalistic styles of fonts, quite classic. Had a pop of magenta and subtle dusty pinky tones. And then for the signage itself, I had frosted acrylic with white text. Yeah.
That sounds really good. I suppose you can go really crazy when you're the stationer as well for your own wedding, which is great.
For sure. I mean, to be honest, if I got married now, I'd do it totally different.
Oh, like, absolutely.
All the time, but yeah, I still love my wedding stationery and signage, and when I look back I'm like, oh, it's still, you know, classic and timeless, and it's still could be today.
I mean, Kelly and I often talk about how there's so many things that we would go back and change now about our weddings. I'm like, we would just have completely different weddings.
I definitely have a bright colourful wedding now, I think.
I think so too. We went like real classic, like white and green, elegant, just real timeless classic. I even didn't want to, like, I had ombre hair was like really in at the time, and I even changed my hair back to like my normal hair colour to be more classic and timeless. So, it's so funny. But
for sure.
I do love like looking back on weddings and being like, oh, this was a trend at the time, and just being able to kind of think about it in that way. It's nice.
Yeah, for sure.
So Hannah, I would love to get your opinion on how couples should be going about looking for a stationer. Like, what would you suggest?
Yeah, for sure. So my number one tip is to look on Instagram and go through different stationers' profiles and sort of see their vibe, because ultimately everyone is quite different and you're going to be attracted to different things. Like, I guess my work's not really that traditional or that romantic in the sense of, you know, the really scripty calligraphy sort of look. And so I think, trying to find the person that you think is best suited to your stationery and signage to bring your vision to life is really important, and Instagram is a great tool to do that.
Yeah.
Pinterest is also another great tool, but if you're trying to find someone locally, I definitely recommend Instagram over Pinterest, because you're going to come across a lot of stationers that are overseas, and some of them may not be able to help you. Although in saying that, you can still, get ideas for what you want your stationery to look like. But yeah, I definitely think Instagram is the best tool to find a stationer.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think is really important is actually finding someone that you vibe with. So the person who's actually behind the stationery, the signage. So I think connecting with some different people over Instagram and just talking to them first and sort of seeing how you feel, talking with them, that might really help the direction in choosing your stationer as well.
Yeah, I think it's so important because you want to feel like the people that you're working with on your wedding day really get you.
Yes, for sure. I've even had people message me and say, I booked you, or I want to work with you because you talk about your cats, you talk about your dog.
Yeah.
Which,
it's important. Yeah.
Too much of that. But on my website, I've got a whole thing about my cats, and I love drawing animals, and I've definitely been doing that more. And I think I'm connecting more with those people that relate to me as a stationer and as a person. So, yeah.
That's so nice. Did you find sometimes that couples want to incorporate their animals as well into their invitations?
Oh, definitely. Just this upcoming season, I should say, I'm getting a lot of requests for animal portraits used on different things.
Oh, I love it.
Lots of fun.
Yeah. I suppose then also they can turn that into a bit of a keepsake artwork for their home then long term as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. There's so many things you can do with a pet portrait as well. I've had people have custom stamps for their invitations. I've had chip cones. I've had napkins. Lots of cool, quirky, fun ways to incorporate your pet or your best friend into your special day.
So, Hannah, before you were chatting about looking on Pinterest for stationery or getting ideas off of there, and then potentially finding a stationer that was on Pinterest that could potentially be overseas. Can you talk to me about the benefit of booking somebody locally to you versus maybe going international?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is that you're actually supporting someone, I guess, that's local generally. And the second thing is you're going to be in the same time zone as them. So working with someone on the same time zone is going to make it a lot easier when you're emailing and talking over the phone, etc., about your stationery.
Yeah, I suppose talking over the phone would be really hard because I just know that even when I've tried to call people in New Zealand, it's been really difficult with the numbers and stuff like that. Yeah. So what about with printed stationery for local versus overseas?
Yeah, so you can generally get invitations from overseas because they're easier to post. But in terms of signage and big and heavier items, I guess, it's definitely harder to get them from overseas. Just the freight cost is insane. I've done costings before and it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
Then often someone end up being hit with taxes as well on top of that. So I definitely recommend going with someone local for your signage. And saying that, I have done weddings in the US where I have provided the design files and then I've found a printer over there and they've printed the work over there. So there's a way around it.
Yeah,
but
that's amazing that you've been able to do that.
Yeah, it's quite fun, quite different.
So I think that if you do find a stationer that might be overseas, if there isn't a way around being able to be served by them, I guess, and you really vibe with them, you could potentially find someone else whose work is very similar to them that is local to you?
I would say yes, but at the same time, you've also got to be so careful with copying. I think that's the number one thing as a stationer. You see stuff all the time which, looks similar, and there's certain ways where you can't avoid that. But if you're doing something that's a little bit different and quite outside of the box, I find that tricky. I myself, if I get work that is a bit different, and they're wanting it replicated, I'll actually say no.
Yeah.
And I'll tell them to go to the original designer, because I don't feel comfortable taking someone else's design and basically saying that I did it.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Yeah, so genuine. I love that so much. When it comes to like somebody coming to you and wanting to replicate a design that you've done previous, do you help couples to be like, I can do that for sure, but how about I like incorporate some of the other ideas that you've got to do with your wedding, like with your aesthetic or your colours or something else that they might have that's a bit different for them, to make it more towards like a style that fits them individually?
Absolutely. I actually do that quite a bit. And yeah, I mean, often sometimes people come to me and they're so set on a design that I've done.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what if we just try this one? Or why don't we position this a bit differently? And I just give them some different options when it comes to actually designing. And yeah, most of the time they do switch to the other suggestions that I've provided. Yeah.
That's so amazing. What timings do you recommend for invites being sent out and an RSVP date?
So I recommend about 4 to 5 months prior to your wedding date, getting them sent out. And then in regards to an RSVP date, I recommend generally around the 6 to 7 week mark. A lot of people have been like, oh, why is the RSVP date so far out from the wedding still? And there's a few reasonings for this. So first of all, you're going to find that some guests haven't actually responded to the RSVP date. So you're then going to spend about a week following up with them. You're then going to know roughly your numbers at this stage. So you might find that this other guest can actually now come to your wedding, so you can invite them last minute. Not all the time does that happen, but sometimes that does happen. And secondly, there's going to be vendors who need to know numbers around the 5 week, 4 week mark. So for example, your caterers, they're going to need to know your numbers, and your stationers like me, we're really going to need to know your numbers, and also your guest list, so that we can make things such as the seating chart.
Yeah, perfect. So speaking about timings, Hannah, when should couples be looking at booking in someone to do their stationery?
Yeah, so it really depends what they're after. So if you want save the dates, this is when I recommend sending them out about a year in advance. So you'll then want to get in touch sort of around 14 months, 15 months prior to the wedding date, so that we can get started on those. But for day of stationery, I generally find that most couples get in touch sort of 8 months prior to their wedding date.
So you said about sending the save the dates out 12 months before the wedding. Can you tell me when save the dates are actually necessary for the wedding?
So I find save the dates are necessary in a couple different situations. So the first one is if you're having a destination wedding where you're going to have guests coming from overseas. And the second one is if you're getting married at a busy time of the year. So think of like Christmas or around school holidays. It's definitely important to let your guests know, so that they can make any arrangements, such as like travel arrangements, accommodation, babysitters, etc.
Yeah, that's really good. I think about like grand final day here in Australia as well.
And like long weekends as well. Like definitely need to sort of let your guests know earlier.
I suppose it's really good to consider public holidays in regards to that. Like for Easter, for example, lots of families like to go away. They have their traditions, that kind of a thing. So if you are having, your wedding over Easter, you would definitely need to send out a save the date.
For sure, or even just sending out your invites earlier. So I sometimes have couples come to me sort of around 8 months prior to their wedding date, and they haven't sent out save the dates, but they're getting married at a busy time of the year. I'll say, look, send out your invitations a little bit earlier, just to get that notice out. Sometimes I say that we've emailed some friends, but that's not always the case. So I think sending out the invitation a little bit earlier sometimes is important if you haven't sent out a save the date.
Yeah. Could you also then do like an online save the date?
Absolutely, yeah. I've also done a lot of digital invitations. So I guess cohesively, like the fonts and the colours all match with what I'm then creating for the invitations, but they just get an image, so like a JPEG image that they send to all their guests by email.
Yeah. I remember watching Bride Wars, and with like Kate Hudson and Anne Hathaway. And if you remember the scene where I don't know, Anne Hathaway comes home and she's saying to her fiance, like, oh, I'm going to talk to my best friend. And then he's like, oh, that's perfect. Like she's out choosing her, like their save the dates. And she's just like, but you have to know your date to pick out your save the dates, like your date. And he's just like, well, I don't know what's going on. And then she like gets on her phone and she sends out the tackiest save the date over like email. It's so bad. And I remember one guest being like, what's Kajar, Emma? So funny. Yeah. But yeah, it's such a good movie. I still love watching it. But it's actually not tacky now to send an online save the date. And it can. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. There's also free websites that I've seen people use as well to essentially save the date. Yeah.
No, I think it's a really good way to save on paper and stuff with sustainability
definitely.
and all of that and get it out really fast.
Saving money as well, because I guess in terms of stationery, everything can add up. So I always say if you can skip a save the date, actually a paper save the date, I should say, then do it.
So what is usually included in an invitation suite?
So traditionally there's the invitation, there's the details card, there's the RSVP card and occasionally a wishing well card. But I'm finding that this has changed quite a bit in the recent years. Most people now just have an invitation, then they have a details card and that's it. So on the details card or at the end of the invitation, they then have a link to a wedding website for guests to RSVP. So the reasoning for this is that the couple's actually saving money by not having the additional card. And also, again, not having a physical RSVP means that there's no additional stamp costs that the couple has to pay. And also they're not waiting for, snail mail to get their RSVPs back. They can just RSVP online.
Yeah, I know with snail mail, people really can be so terrible at sending things back. So, I mean, I go to the post office quite frequently anyway for work, but I just think about how hard it would be for somebody that doesn't normally go to the post office for anything.
Definitely. And I even think collating the RSVP details back on a card is harder than getting that information through a website, because a lot of these websites actually have, a way to download it on an Excel spreadsheet these days. It's just so handy.
So other than invitations and save the dates, what are some other stationery pieces that couples can add to their invitation suite? For example, if they wanted to have vow cards or a letter to each other, what else could be included?
Yeah, well, just like you said, you can definitely add on things such as letters, personalised letters or cards. I can always design something up that's custom to match everything else. Also, I sort of touched on this, but having the personalised menus for your guests, I think that's a really nice personal touch that a lot of people don't actually think about, and it's a fun way to incorporate your guests a bit more and make them feel special, I guess, as well, because while it is your day, it's really nice to make your guests feel part of it as much as you can.
So I guess with working with couples, you can help them to work out some things that they might not have thought of for their wedding that they would need some signage for or some kind of stationery, as well as things that they might not necessarily need, like having a seating plan, for example. Like you could have place cards or you could have a seating chart, but you might not necessarily need a seating chart if you're having an elopement, for example, but you might still have the place cards for where guests are sitting so that they know where to sit. For example, if there was maybe 15 guests, something like that, some people might still have a seating chart for that. But I'm thinking more with a guest book or, specific things that couples might want you to do. I know that some people have the film cameras that they put on tables, or they might have the Fuji Instax, but not necessarily everyone will know what to do with those things. So what would you suggest to couples?
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually had a wedding just recently where a couple said that they'd been to a wedding where they had a Polaroid guest book, but the guests didn't know what to do, so they wanted a sign. So, in this case, I definitely recommend having a sign. Their sign basically said snap shake it, and then write a personalised note and put it in the guest book. So I had a couple recently who had been to a wedding and they had a Polaroid guest book, but the guests didn't actually know what to do. They didn't know they were meant to take a photo and then write a note and put it in the guest book. So it was important to them that they made this really obvious to their guests that they wanted this to happen. So I made a little sign for them that went next to their guest book, which also had their little Polaroid camera, and it just said, snap it, shake it, stick it. And then it basically just said, even underneath that, if it's easier, get a guest to take a photo of you and write a personalised note in our guest book. So I think that's a really good way to illustrate to your guests what you want them to do. I've also had couples where they've had, I guess, different elements to their weddings that are important to them, such as a cigar bar. So they've wanted to know that they want guests to take the cigar and, have a cigar. So I've done cigar signs, also signs where they might be having a cocktail hour, just to point out to guests that it's cocktail hour between this hour and this hour, and to grab a drink and what the drinks are.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have signage on things. Like recently we went to a wedding where there was a dessert bar and there was no sign on the dessert bar to say what time it was open. So the caterers were a little bit slower. So people just went ham on the dessert bar. It was hilarious. But, really good. They were all like different donuts and they were really delicious. I didn't get one though because there's one per guest, and because it was open a bit earlier, everyone went and grabbed one. But it just shows how important it is to have signage so that people know what they're meant to do and when. Obviously, you don't do it so much so that they feel like really controlled or anything like that. But it's just good so that guests know what they're meant to do. They have a little bit of guidance when they need it.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I also had a wedding recently where they had more than one wedding cake. So they had labels for all the different flavours, and also basically like if they were gluten-free or dairy-free, just so they didn't get to know.
That's perfect. Oh my gosh, more than one wedding cake. That's the dream, isn't it?
It's becoming quite the trend now, and I think it's really cool because it's like, why not?
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many dietary requirements these days as well. So it's good to just be so inclusive, but also like if you want to have 4 different flavours, why not? So good. So talking about wishing wells, now that we're in modern day, I'd love to hear about how you go about doing some wording for wishing wells so that it's not awkward, or maybe even how people can replace that. What do you normally suggest to couples?
So I have a few different wording templates, I guess you could say, around this. And one of my favourites is to start with, your presence is our present. I think it's just a nice personalised thing to say to a Does that make sense? Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I think it's just a nice way to say it in a way that's polite to begin with before getting into, we want money, or it'd be nice to have money, or whatever. And then sort of following that up with, if you would like to contribute. So it's an option, not saying that you need to contribute. We'll have a wishing well at the reception. I also sometimes have, in lieu of a gift, we would love to have a $50 donation to go towards your meal, have that every now and then. Then I also have people say that they don't want any presents or gifts, but I think that's totally optional and up to the couple with what they're comfortable with. But just asking it in a way that doesn't come across as too forceful, I guess. I think that's probably key.
Yeah. I suppose there's always going to be those guests that want to give something. So I suppose if they're not wanting to receive a gift, they could always put like a charity in there.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's actually what I did for our own wedding. We donated to different charities that were close to our heart, and just put that on the menu. And also, like, it's a great way, instead of having a favour as well, if you're thinking of having a favour, you can also just donate to a charity on your guest's behalf, opposed to having something physical. Yeah,
that's such a great idea, because I just sometimes being the last as photographers to leave a venue, we just know that, the guests don't always take whatever the gift is, and it's good if it can be, I guess, something that's edible that they're going to eat on the actual day. But, it's such a good idea in lieu of a gift, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So what are some unique and fun things that you've done for some of your couples with their stationery?
So I've done quite a few fun different things, but one of my favourites has been adding pets into people's weddings. So that's me drawing their pet and then having them on things such as napkins and chip cups, like I've discussed. Another thing is also, instead of having table numbers, I've had like table places or table dates. So I've done places that are important to the couple. I've done dates that are important to the couple, and I find those are a really fun way to add that personalised touch to your day. And also it sparks quite a bit of conversation, I found, because we actually did this at my wedding. So I had people be like, oh, why is this named Dunedin? Like, what is that to do with? Or, and so it starts the conversation going. And also another good thing about doing this, it means that ultimately it's kind of a decor piece opposed to a table number.
Yeah.
So you can take it home afterwards and you can put it on a shelf and you can make it part of your home, and it's a keepsake. It's not something you're going to throw out.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's good if you can keep things to a minimum when you are like throwing things out after your wedding, absolutely, as well.
For sure.
So tell me about some of the trends that you're seeing or have seen, and like what some of your favourite trends have been as well.
So I've noticed a lot of colour. So in particular, bright, bold colour with funky shapes. So the wave or the scallop shape is really in at the moment. Arches are still in. I'd say the scallop has actually overtaken the arch with me. In terms of the bright colours that are in, I'm noticing a lot of purple and orange at the moment has come in. A lot of that cobalt. Yep. A lot of that cobalt blue, lime green, lemon, yellow, but also I've also noticed a lot of pastels coming in as well. So sort of like sorbet tones. So I've noticed a lot of pattern as well. So stripes, triangles, circles, checkerboard, all being incorporated into stationery and signage as well. So it's really fun and funky.
So I've seen a lot of like really vintage style cakes recently, and I was just wondering, like I've seen some kind of like 60s vibes when it comes to like text, in particular when it comes to stationery. And I was wondering if some like vintage looks were coming back into stationery now.
Yeah, I think so. That's sort of like the bubble, I guess, text. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I've seen that a lot, and I've actually done a couple of weddings with that sort of bubble, bold, retro font, but maybe not so much in the retro colour tones, maybe more so actually in like the really bold, bright colours. So I've done quite a few like reds and pinks and blues, opposed to like those retro colours like the browns and the orange, but I've still seen that as well. But just for me personally, that's what I've been doing. Yeah,
amazing.
So my favourite trend for me personally is something that sort of mixes a bit of shape, so whether that's a wave with pattern and then throw in an illustration. So it's quite a lot, but I feel like the juxtaposition between it all just really balances everything out. Really cool, and it's just a bit different.
That's amazing. So what are some of the ways to keep costs down for couples when it comes to their stationery and signage for their wedding?
Yeah, so we sort of touched on this, but I guess with your stationery, only having what you need. So you probably don't need an RSVP card. You probably don't need a wishing well card. So get rid of those. The other thing is adding a shape to your stationery can add an additional cost. Also, your print finishes will make a difference in cost. So digital printing is the most cost effective. So you see letterpress and foil a lot, and they have a very high price range, and I don't think that a lot of people realise that to begin with. So you're definitely sticking to digital if you're on a budget. The next thing would be for your signage, staying away from acrylic. Acrylic has a higher price point than foam core signage does. I think those are like the two main things I would suggest.
Yeah. So talking about letterpress then, with letterpress, I'm not sure if couples understand the process of letterpress and why that can be so expensive. I believe that with that there's like specific platings that they have to make
Yes.
per design that
Yes.
then go into the letterpress to make the design. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And so for each colour, you have to have a different plate made. And then also the ink is different. So it's not the same as digital printing at all. Essentially, it's like mixing paints. So you've got to mix the inks together to make the right ink colour, and then this has to be fed onto the machine. And then each single piece of paper is then hand put into the machine one by one, and then often throughout the process you're going to have to be checking and making sure nothing's moved to make sure that everything's aligned properly.
Yeah, it sounds like it's very involved.
It's a lengthy process post to digital printing, and that's why the cost is quite a bit higher, but also the plate cost is expensive.
Yeah. And I'm not sure how sustainable that would be. Can you tell me a bit about that?
So all of our paper is FSC certified, so that just means it comes from sustainably managed forests. So if trees are cut down, they're being replaced after the trees that are being cut down and not from places where the land is protected. And you can just feel really comfortable about where the paper or the pulp for the paper is being sourced from.
Yeah, that's so good. So is there also a recycled paper option then as well, rather than just like FSC is really good, but then also being able to have something that's already recycled and then can be recycled again? Is there that option as well?
Yes, absolutely. There's quite a few different ranges actually. There's paper that is recycled, has recyclable content in it. There's also paper that are made from plant fibres such as wheat. Really, really cool environmentally friendly ways. Paper.
Yeah, sounds like there's so many really good options for couples to think about as well. What about things that couples can kind of leave off? Like I'm thinking like acrylic, that kind of a thing, as well as like maybe we said earlier as well, like not having a wishing well card and things like that.
Yeah, definitely avoiding acrylic if you can, because that can take like 200 years or more to decompose in landfill, unless it's something that you're going to keep.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, like with table numbers or making them into table names so they're then a piece of home decor.
Yeah.
Or adding your welcome sign into your house, like your entrance in the hallway or in the office. Otherwise, stay away from acrylic if you can.
Yeah. That sounds really good. I think that's a great idea, especially thinking about incorporating those things into your home and thinking about what you're using for your wedding and how long it will actually last. Like what is the lifetime of whatever it is that you're choosing, and what are you going to use it for after your wedding?
Yeah, absolutely.
So couples can kind of ask you then, like if they're thinking about how they want to be sustainable with their invitations or their stationery suites, they can come to you and get some really good advice or suggestions from you, which is amazing. You're obviously like so knowledgeable in that area.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm always catering to what the couples want and giving them ideas on what might work best for them based on what they're after. And I actually have a whole blog post based on sustainability and using eco-friendly paper and materials in your wedding stationery and signage. And I often link this to my couples just so they can read through it and see what's suitable to them.
Oh, that sounds amazing. We'll make sure that we link to that in the show notes. For any couples out there listening that want to read all about that, we'll link to Blossie's blog post about how you can be sustainable and eco-friendly with your invitations or stationery suite for your wedding. So I can imagine that pricing is going to vary from supplier to supplier when it comes to doing stationery and invitations. Also, like I'm thinking about, different costs for different people, different levels as to, how long you've been doing it, as well as freight costs are ever changing. But I'd love to hear about, what on average a couple might spend on their invitations, depending on, obviously what's included in that. Could you talk me a bit through that?
Yeah, so it's definitely going to depend on a few factors such as your guest count, because that really does change the pricing of everything, as well as your print finishes and your signage finishes as well. So on average, I would say that for invitations, it sort of is around the $1,000 mark. that couples spend with me personally, but every single stationer is different, and it's based on, what they're happy to set their hourly rate at. And then for signage and day of, I would say that people spend a lot more on their day of. So the average for me would probably be around the $2,000 mark. That includes, your welcome sign, your seating chart, all your extra little bits of signage such as the wishing well sign, your table numbers, your menus, your name places, and so on.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really good. Thank you so much for taking us through that. And because this is being recorded in 2022, couples could expect that average to go up for 2023 or 2024 and beyond.
Yes, definitely. The pricing of everything is always evolving and changing as the cost of materials continue to go up as well. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. For myself, I actually don't quote too far in advance. I basically, for day of stationery, I'm around that 8 months prior to the wedding date is when I'm quoting, just to make sure that I'm still being able to pay myself enough I need to for my business and all the overheads, etc. Because the suppliers' costs do go up each year, and sometimes multiple times a year.
Well, thank you so much for going through that with us, Hannah. It's been so lovely chatting with you today. Thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. It's been, so lovely having you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
So we've been talking to Hannah from Blossie that does invitations and stationery. So you can get in touch with Hannah on Facebook, Instagram, and on her website. So if you'd like to get in touch with Hannah on her website, she is blossie.com.au. Blossie is spelled Blossie. You can find Blossie on Instagram at blossie.com.au. You can also find her on Facebook, blossie.com.au. And then if you'd like to find Hannah as well on Pinterest, which I highly recommend, she is Blossie AU.